Ladies and gentlemen, I live in Diego Martin in St. Anne's and Tobago. I work in Port of Spain, and this evening I am in Chatham. We couldn't be further away from where I normally spend my time. But when I was offered the opportunity to join you here in Chatham today, I could not decline, if only it was possible so to do, because I wanted to be here with all of the people I just associated with this project who have been named in the protocol list here for having done your job, contributed in every way that you could have to ensure that in Chatham, at this time, we could offer the people of Chatham, particularly the young people who will be educated here, one of the finest educational facilities in Trinidad and Tobago. It's been a long journey. I met one or two potholes along the way, a number of curves that could have been straightened, but I also saw some significant road construction projects between where I live and where we are today. There's a lot that is happening with respect to the physical infrastructure, and this school is a significant addition to the educational infrastructure, and Trinidad and Tobago moved on. I want to spend a couple minutes in this address reminding the population who is listening and those of you who are present as to the time of day that it is and the time of year that we are in and the period of our existence that we are in. We as a people, since 2014, have been suffering some significant reduction in our circumstances. There was a poll that was published this weekend, and I think it says that 39% of the people who were polled, 39%, said that we are not better off today than we were sometime before in the tenure of this government. I took note of that, but I was not surprised by it, because in these times, it is quite expected that things are not as good as they used to be. But I was heartened and encouraged by the fact that 61% either felt that we were doing as good as we could have been, and some felt that we were doing better than we were doing. 61%. Because, ladies and gentlemen, unless we realize the difficulty that we are facing, the decisions that we are required to make may not be made in the best way, or we may not be making the decisions at all, and other decisions could have put us in a worse position. I mentioned 2014 because up until then, our major revenue stream was relatively good, because we live on external prices for hydrocarbons, oil and gas. In 2014, there was a significant dip in the pricing arrangement, resulting in a situation where our earnings from these major contributors to the revenue was such that by the time we started a new government, a new administration in 2015, one of the main assignments of that new government was to reduce the expenditure that was taking place in the country, because we were, even before then, relying on significant borrowings to maintain our pace and our space. But with that decline that was taking place between 2014 and 2015 and ongoing, we could not even rely on a small amount of borrowing to close the gap, because the borrowings that we had to do was so large. And the fact of the matter was that the revenue available to the new government was $20 billion less than we had been accustomed to in the previous years of 2013, 2014. So we had $20 billion less. But we couldn't just shut the door or add 2 and 2 to make 4, as some people advised us, because that would have been calamitous. We softened the arrangement by incurring significant debt. Those of you who pay attention to the national budget discussions or the parliamentary statements and questions and answers would have seen that the government, in that first year of this administration, had borrowed $14 billion to close the gap between revenue and expenditure. And then we had to cut and contrive and aim, as part of the objective and the assignment of this government, to bring that gap down, way down below 14. And we got down, by the time we were informed that we were facing a pandemic, which was on its way, the number we were looking at in terms of how much we were borrowing to close the gap between revenue and expenditure, that number was $6 billion. And of course, we were expecting to go down to about $3 or $4 billion as we progress towards hopefully balancing the budget sometime about now or 2022. And then comes the news that we are part and parcel of the world's population that is exposed to a pandemic. How does one respond to that? By January of 2020, in preparing to respond to the pandemic, one of the advisors of the government in our recovery program meeting very emotionally pointed out to the government and those gathered that if we do not take serious steps to make money available to people within the next 6 months, which was like May or June of 2020, tens of thousands of people in this country would be starving in a no-hope situation. That sounded very dramatic, it was very emotional, but we all had to agree that that is the situation that the government was facing. So over and above the depth of borrowing that we were involved in before the pandemic, we were now being asked to find additional money to fund living conditions and spaces at the food table for the population at large, including trying to keep businesses operating to keep jobs by paying whatever the government was owing in its long-term debt profile, finding $3 billion to immediately pay that into the business community for debt in the VAT system that was owing, and also to find monies to make grants available to business and households, and of course to pay for food, to literally hand out food in baskets to people at home to make sure that they were fed. Those were the things we had to do in 2020 into 2021. And at that time, the virus was being looked at as something that will come and go. And after it is gone, we could get back, maybe by, it was said, May 2020, then September 2020, then the end of the year. We are now in August 2021. And the pandemic is still alive and well, and the virus is roaring around the world still. Our situation has not improved where the virus is concerned. Our spending has not improved. We made spendings, a lot of it involving debt, but most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we have held it all together, and we are alive to see each other's face in 2021. I know it is easy to be advised that you should do this, and you should do that, and you should do this, and you should do that. But all I will say to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that In the decision making, in all these circumstances, there's never one way to do it. It's always a choice. Options. What are the options and which ones shall we choose? As head of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, representing all the people of Trinidad and Tobago, I can say today that while you may all not agree with everything or with anything at all, I can say to you with confidence that a dispassionate examination of how this country has progressed in the last 24 months, you cannot but agree that we have made the right decisions along the way. Some of these decisions have been very painful. Some have been unexpected, but they've had to be made. But this period of our life, this period of our country's history, has been so dominated by the effects of the virus, of the pandemic of 2021, that the news among ourselves, from us, coming to us, local, regional, and international, have been so dominated by this virus that it was easy for you to believe that there was nothing else going on and there was nothing else that could go on. Today I want to tell you that is not so. That a lot has been going on, a lot is going on, and a lot will continue to go on in Trinidad and Tobago. During this very difficult period, socially, emotionally, economically, and however else you want to put it, Trinidad and Tobago, we've kept our flag flying, we've kept our people together, and we've kept our country whole. Of course, there are bills to be paid in the years ahead. Of course, we want to make sure that we are not engaged in waste and corruption. And of course, we want to make sure that as you come to the national pot, you don't leave it more than you are entitled to. These are all challenges of the period. In the energy sector, all the workforces are out and had been out from the beginning. We never shut down the energy sector. From the beginning of the pandemic till now, we have never shut down an aspect of our energy sector. Maybe because we couldn't. We had to live on it. Everybody was out there in oil and gas and support services and oil and gas. We shut our manufacturing sector down for a little while to make sure that there wasn't the kind of movement that could have caused the virus to damage us irrecoverably. So manufacturing was shut down for a while. And then, as we got control of the situation and a better understanding of the virus and its behavior and its effects on human beings, we reopened our manufacturing, and manufacturing has remained in operation in Trinidad and Tobago. Recently, we had a bit of a stop again. We restarted, and today, the retail sector, which has been down for almost 2 months, have opened their doors because we have made decisions to cautiously and step by step, on a solid foundation of decision making, to open and open and open and open until we are now at the point where there are only a small number of facets of our country that remain closed in this pandemic. One, places of entertainment, bars, cinemas, and so on. Because we said if we have to sacrifice activity, the logic was to sacrifice the activity that would not damage our livelihood at its base. But everything we do is part of the livelihood. Going to have a beer to socialize at the bar is part of the livelihood. But in the case of bars and so on, the livelihood, the detriment of being socialized there is what we had to stop, because that's what the virus wanted, socializing. But most importantly, and most worrisome to me at this stage of the history of this development, is that our children at large have not been to school for a year and a half. I need not tell you the effects that that is having on the population, and the experts will tell us that there's a long-term effect to that. Even when children come back out to school, there would be a lingering negative that would associate itself with that period that this generation of students have stayed home for a year and a half in a pandemic. But most importantly, we need to keep them alive. So this school is being accepted from the contractor today. I can't even say being opened. We are accepting the project from the contractor. The school is finished and ready. Where are the students? I don't know when they will be in here. But I want them to be in here soon. Because this school is part of a long history of education as a primary responsibility of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, where over time we improved the old with the new, the small with the larger, the few with the many. And today this is but the last of the new schools to present that improvement in the physical environment, replacing a 103-year-old school with a modern facility built in a pandemic. Let us not sell ourselves short. We built this school during probably the most difficult period in modern times in Trinidad and Tobago. It's completed. I have some colleagues in the parliament who very frequently pat themselves on the back and shout and say that they built 100 schools. And therefore, we must acknowledge that. But the real story is a different story. The story is that in that very sad period of 2014 that I mentioned, when money was beginning to shrink up, my colleagues engaged in awarding about 100 contracts to build about 100 schools. That's one way of doing it. Maybe it was let's solve all the problems on one day, in 1 year, in one period. That's one way of doing it. That's not how we are doing it. Even if we wanted to do it that way, we cannot. Because even as we took the responsibility for dealing with those 100 schools, what we were finding and what we are finding and what exists is that we had to prioritize. But we had many tens of contractors already holding on to claims to the Treasury because contracts were awarded for these 100 schools without any funding identified in a period where the Treasury is as I have described, and then we had the problems of the pandemic, and throughout that entire period, money was not available, but we have contractors at our throats. I could tell you our circumstances have been disadvantaged. But what the Minister of Finance has been able to do during that period of time that we have had this responsibility for dealing with this issue of school construction is to try to unravel that situation by prioritizing and spending. Because we did spend significant amounts of money in trying to get these schools to this state during the period when we were having to spend money in the other areas that I've mentioned and areas that have not been mentioned. I was advised by the Minister of Finance very, very recently that the Ministry of Finance in this school building program in the period 2015 to now, we spent well over $1.5 billion. We've identified and found that money and spent about 1.5 billion, of which this school, the expenditure on this school is but a part of that. That's why we could have this school today. And in the next few days, there are a couple more that were completed in that expenditure. But what we had to deal with is a requirement to find 1.5 billion to keep those contractors going in that contractor spree. What I'm not telling you is that that is only a part of the problem with the school building. Because we have another 30 contractors, 20 on secondary schools and 30 on EC schools with contracts and part handled projects in various stages of completion, which require another $2 billion. I want to repeat that. Having already spent 1.5 billion, 1.6 billion in that school building program madness of 2014 and 2015, we are contracted to another 30 or 40 contractors for another $2 billion in construction and about another billion in outfitting for those schools. So we're looking at a $3 billion commitment there. And that is not all. That is from the first group that we are now in finishing, the second group that will cost $2 billion plus $1 billion to outfit, and then there's another number of hundreds of millions or $1 billion out there to complete this package of the 100 school program that was taking place in 2014, 2015. Thus is the portion of this government. So anytime you hear anybody talking about we build 100 schools as part of the accomplishment of any government in this country, just remember, it's not we build 100 schools, it's that we awarded contracts to contractors to the tune of almost $5 billion when money was at its scarcest. That's what it is. But we have prioritized them, and we are going through the system. There's one community in this country where the school, a secondary school, in that package of $1 billion school construction, there's a school there which has been condemned because the school is physically unusable. A whole secondary school that has to be condemned. And the logic is that you have to build a new secondary school. The estimate for that secondary school in this program is $288 million. So even if we said, okay, because that school had to be condemned, the next thing is to build that school immediately. The question is, do we at this time have $288 billion to put on that problem as against the other problems that are in front of us? But of course, another thing too is that the numbers by themselves are frightening because they were not arrived at by any competitive process. Fellow citizens, I have been Prime Minister of this country for 6 years. And there were days, and there are days, when it's very painful. One of the most painful days for me is coming face to face with a government program that was supposed to cost about $9 million. And inside of 2 years, that program ended up costing taxpayers $447 million. And the difference between that $9 million and the $447 million is naked, unadulterated criminal activity. So today, as we are able to open this school, and we'll be able to open others in the days and weeks and months and years ahead, let us just remember that for the 39% who said that things aren't as good as they used to be, I will simply say to you, you have no idea what you're talking about. Because if you did know, I'm sure you would want to rethink that. Because I genuinely believe that we are better off today than we were when we started out on our journey in this administration. We are currently at the stage in the pandemic where the health department and the world scientists and the world's authorizing bodies, having guided us to this place, telling us what we can and shouldn't do. And I've made this trip down here to Chatham to speak to the rural communities of Trinidad and Tobago, that you have an exposure that you need to know about, and you have a responsibility that you need to accept. COVID-19 and its variants are not going to give you a pass because you are a rural district. Wherever there are human beings, this pandemic is a threat. And rural communities need to pay attention, because you may find that given the nature of the configuration of the country and its facilities, that if you come down with COVID in any significant way, the kind of healthcare that is required in terms of infrastructure, hospitals and their beds, doctors and nurses and technical staff in hospitals may not be as available to you in the rural district as they are in the urban areas of the country. So you have to be particularly careful that you avoid becoming statistics in the COVID period. Unfortunately, as I monitor the report on a daily basis of where the virus is being confirmed as being present, it is showing up that 3 rural areas are in the forefront of driving those numbers that you hear every day. Every day you hear the numbers of 280, 350 new cases. The 2 principal areas where those numbers are driven by, in fact, if I name the 4 principal areas, one is County Victoria, and it has been so since March. The other one is County Caroni, and it has been so since March. The third one is St. George East, and it has been so since April. And the fourth one is Tobago, which is currently disregarding the dangers that we are facing. Today, I want to appeal to all the citizens who live in those 4 areas, County Victoria, County Caroni, St. George East, and Tobago, to pay attention to the fact that it is among your population that the majority of the COVID-infected people exist and is being spread. And the danger there, if we are, whatever is driving it, whether it is non-compliance with the health protocols, whether it is disregard for the danger, whether it's belief in what is on social media, whatever is driving it, if you want to be among those who have the best chance to evade a bad outcome, get vaccinated. There is enough vaccine available in this country for persons to go and get vaccinated, because vaccination is the only process that is known to human beings to give you a good chance to survive the infection of the virus. The vaccines at this point in time are not vaccines that can prevent you from getting infected, as vaccines are with some other kinds of illnesses. But that doesn't mean that the vaccine is not useful. What the current available vaccines can do for you is to prevent you from being as infectious as others. And if you get infected, as you could be, that you will not be as clinically ill as those who have been and require hospital treatment. And better still, you will not get ill to the point of your life being threatened. So the threat of the virus is reduced. The virus is not eliminated from our presence or from its ability to infect us. But if you do get infected, you stand as a vaccinated person a much better chance of surviving the infection. The data that we have available now is that the illnesses that are raging now around the world where the Delta virus exists is that it's an epidemic, a pandemic of the unvaccinated people. The bulk of the people who are getting infected and dying and being hospitalized today around the world are people who are not vaccinated. So, you want to go to heaven sometime. So you want to count yourself among those who worship God and acknowledge His presence. Because you want to be counted among those who will get selected to go to heaven. Because you know if you don't, in your religious teaching, you will be counted among those who will go to a different place that is very warm or quite hot. So you choose to be religious. You choose to be good. You choose to follow the teaching of your various religions because you are choosing to be among those who will be counted as having satisfied the requirement. It's the same logic with the virus. Get yourself counted among the vaccinated because these are the people who are best able to respond to an infection of a virus that is still raging and is possibly mutating. It has gone from alpha, beta, gamma, delta. It could continue. And what is happening is that each mutation produces a different strain of the virus, and one of those strains could be such that it destroys all the defenses we have. As we are being told now that the Delta virus is more deadly, it spreads more easily, it generates more viral particles, so therefore it's more infectious. The same thing could come to us in the next day, next week, next month to be told that there's another virus, another variant, which now doesn't respond. What's our position? Thank God we're not there. Thank God the vaccines are being said that they will respond. They will cause us to respond properly to the known variant. But we don't know that that's the last variant. So ladies and gentlemen, particularly those of you in the rural district, because you are not seeing it next door, because you don't think you are out front where the numbers are, the fact is that is not so. The numbers are very high in rural districts and the danger is great. And as for children, I don't know that you could point out one parent who you can say that parent wants anything but the best for his or her child. To be called a parent, that is a given. Every parent is to be known or is known to want the best for his or her child. Cast your mind back to when every so often we have an accident like a road accident or some situation where some primary school child in the formative years of age 8, 9, 10, 12 is killed. Cast your mind back to the level of grief that this country faces when that happens to one child in one school, in one area. What is going to be our position if we carelessly do not protect these children and this virus spreads among us and a significant number of our children are infected and damaged or destroyed in the process? What we are being told about the current Delta virus, unlike the original virus, it is now affecting younger people. Before, as we dealt with COVID, it was the older people that were being affected in a way with a higher mortality, and younger people were partying saying, well, I'm immune. The Delta variant is the opposite a significant number of young people and people in their prime are now the targets of this variant. And that is why we need to protect our school children by getting them vaccinated so that we can live with this virus as we are being required to do. The virus is not like a hurricane where you get notice that it's coming, as we got notice, that it is here, and that it will pass, and once it passes, we are in the clear. Hurricane gone by somebody else. It's not like that at all. Right now, we have no idea, except statistically, mathematically, we can work out an arrangement where the more people who are vaccinated, making it difficult for the virus to propagate, that in itself will result in a depression in the amount of virus that is around populations, and it will get less and less. And the less virus there is, the less there is to propagate, and eventually the virus will pass out of the population or remain endemic in the population, and we're surviving it in that way because we are immune either by vaccination or by autoimmune. That's what it is. It's not going to pass us like a season. Hurricane pass. It's a 5-day or 1 week thing. 2 days coming, 44 hours here, it go on for another week somewhere else. It is not like that. But we want to continue with our manufacturing. We want to continue with our energy sector. We want to continue with our school, population at school. We want to continue to go to church. We want to go on the beach. And I'm sure half of you young people, you were looking forward and asking me whether there's going to be a carnival next year. Great. I would love to tell you, yes, there'll be a carnival next year. But what if Delta and the carnival coming together? What's going to happen? And what if half of the population is not vaccinated because somebody tell you it's not a good vaccine? You don't like the label. You don't like Bill Gates. You don't like the chip that they're putting in you so they could monitor you whether you're gone by somebody's wife or something like that. What stupidness going on in this country? We have lived with vaccines. I'm sure every one of us in this room, parents and grandparents and your personal self, we have been healthy for our lives, taking it for granted because since we were babes in arms, vaccination has been protecting us from microbes. The only difference between this vaccine and the other vaccines that we have been living on is Facebook and Instagram, and the same technology that allows that communication to be so destructive and disruptive is the same technology that allows us to be able to find a vaccine so quickly to COVID-19. But you know what? There are some people who don't want the vaccine because it was developed too quickly. Rather than acknowledge that the technology today has allowed that to happen, that is a reason not to use it. And some of our national leaders, one in particular, leading tens of thousands of people in this country and telling them, don't use the vaccine because it is for emergency use and has not been certified by the EMA. Now, if the vaccine is authorized for emergency use, what the hell is the pandemic? Isn't the pandemic an emergency, the emergency? And that is why the vaccine is approved for emergency use. If we keep it in the fridge or on the shelf to age and get dated, many of us will not be alive at the end of it. So people, I'm asking you at this time, especially those of you who are responsible for children between the age of 12 and 18, vaccines are available. The country requires your cooperation to get vaccinated because every vaccinated person is one step in the country going in the right direction. Every vaccinated person is one location that the virus is not welcome, and is one person who is not likely to be demanding a bed in the hospital, and one person who is not likely to be listed among the statistics of who died last night. I observe that we are taking it for granted. that every morning we get up, 7 people, 10 people, 8 people die. It's adding up, you know. It's adding up. We're over 1,000. When we started out discussing our response to COVID, I said to the population, let us not wait until we are counting our success or failures in the number of coffins, because that was the promise of the virus, coffins. At that time, there was nothing we could do. Now there's something we can do. And I would like to know that in the next few days, I'm hearing from the MP and from the Education Department and all of you, Minister of Local Government and Rural Development, hearing from you that our rural districts are alert to this danger, are responding in the only way we could respond, based on the technical advice we have and the materials we have to respond in the way of vaccines. And very soon, this school would be full of children, and the sound of laughter and chatter would replace what exists now as the silence of the virus and the pandemic of 2021. Chatham, you are representing a large part of this country. You've represented us well all the time in very many areas, and we expect that you will continue so to do. Parents of Chatham and surrounding districts, Point Fortin constituency and elsewhere in St. Patrick, make yourselves vaccinated. And at the end of it, let us be hopeful that we can continue to have a life that is as normal as possible in the face of a threat that is still evolving. I thank you for your involvement. I thank you for your contribution. But most importantly, I want to thank you for your cooperation in getting our nation vaccinated. Thank you very much.